everybody? It's Oren from the Darwin Bandits. Hope you had a wonderful week. We are having our Friday episode, and we have DM Ray, independent comic creator. DM stands for Dungeon Master, because DM Ray puts together the Madcaps. It's a Kickstarter that's coming out very soon. A lot of it's based on, the role-playing games and things like that. It's a wonderful, wonderful series. Ray's put a lot of hard work into it, and he's talking about how being, a dungeon master for so long and creating the stories that go with the game has helped him become a comic creator as well, which is a really cool link. It's something I haven't really thought about, but yeah, it just makes total sense. So here we go, DM Ray. Ray Jameson, aka DM Ray. Sir, thank you so much for joining us today.
Very nice to meet you. Happy to be on. This is going to be a good time, I'm sure.
I'm looking forward to it. So let's start at the beginning. How do you first discover comics?
Comic books. Before I can remember, I have an older brother. He loved comics. I was born in the mid 80s, and he was reading comics since before that. So I got some healthy exposure to some gems, we'll put it that way.
And how did you make the decision that this is something you maybe wanted to, pursue or get involved with?
Well, that's a very long story. I tried to tell it differently every time. Um, Basically, in a nutshell, because of my influence of my older brother, and being in that era, we're talking about the time when comic companies and cartoons and toy stores or toy companies rather, decided to let's merge powers and get a lot more money out of our customers. And the kids are going to love it, and the parents are going to hate us as their wallets scream. I was right in the middle of all of that. I went right from not just comics, but I mean, they are technically comics nowadays as well, but Transformers, G.I. Joe, um, Masters of the Universe, Silverhawks, Brave Star, and the list goes on and on from the 80s.
Mhm.
By the time 1989 hit with Michael Keaton's Batman, I was only 5, but my parents, be it a good thing or not, I was lucky enough to see that one in theater, and that was definitely an impact, a statement for me. And again, being of that age, I was very fortunate to go through the 90s and be seeing Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill play out Batman and the Joker. Although I personally am not a fan of Spider-Man the animated series because a lot of stories were rushed, in my opinion, it really did a good job at getting a younger generation interested in Spider-Man again. Um, there's so many hidden gems in there throughout the 90s, lots of good cartoons and really cool comic arcs in the early 90s. I have a love-hate relationship with the mid late 90s. There was a big learning curve from them, and we'll just say repercussions of Image Comics. It was eventually a good thing, we'll put it that way, for Marvel. Um, I've loved comics. I love to draw comics. When I was a kid, I took some comic courses, learning out the penciling, the inking, the coloring, the lettering, the paneling, the story, the structure, the pages, and on and on and on. And I've always had a heavy appreciation of the medium. Um, as I got into my late 20s, I ended up moving across country and I left all of my friends. So we decided we needed excuses to hang out via webcam. We can't just sit there and talk, even though that's obviously fun as well.
Mhm.
But I decided let's play some Dungeons and Dragons. I've never played it before. So I took the ambition of becoming Dungeon Master. Lots of no complaints, but definitely a lot of learning curves there as well. And I made a homebrew campaign, and I made a bunch of stories that all existed in the same realm. I made it all up by myself, all of the history, the lore, all of the characters, the cities, and so forth and so on. Eventually, I was in a scenario as an adolescent and growing up, I didn't have the opportunity to make this passion or hobby a profession.
Mhm.
But with that said, I still liked writing stories, especially as a dungeon master. So I decided, what if I converted this into a comic? By the time I had this thought, I had over a decade of lore that was generated between myself and the players that all played these games. So for me, it was the equivalent of recalling back on these cool stories that happened. It was like watching your favorite TV show that you watched season after season. And I can recall season 2, episode 3, this really cool thing happened. And The only thing I did very different for the Madcaps was I took out the players' characters and I made my own characters in it. But this issue, or sorry, this comic, it's just a mini series. It's only 3 issues long, and it takes place all over one night. It's about 4 friends. They have some cool quirks to them, but they're not the mightiest of characters in the realm.
Mhm.
And there's certain gravity and things at stake where you can actually relate. Like, it's possible they could die. It isn't like, how is Superman not going to snap this child's neck? He can like do whatever he wants, kind of thing, right? But issue 2 is coming out in the new year. Issue 1 was a really cool experience, and I was really happy to work with all of the talent. I'm just really beside myself with how um, being just a fan of these different mediums and being in a position where it can actually express them through the same medium. It's just a really cool experience.
For you as a writer, and also, as you said before, with Dungeons and Dragons as a dungeon master, when you're creating a character, what's the blueprint? Where do you start? Is it a name, a look, an ability? Where do you build the character from?
Well, I base my characters off of real people. So I get to kind of cheat. And the reason I say I cheat is if name a celebrity, something that will not get us in political trouble right now. Name me
Uh,
a celebrity, common one.
I'll go with common one. Um, Chris Evans.
Okay, Chris Evans. So he'd be an actor. If he was, if I converted him to something like D&D, I would be thinking, well, he's a very charismatic person. So what classes are based off of charisma? So with him, I'm thinking Bard, but he's not music based. So I would have to do something like College of Swords because he is in decent shape. For a background, he'd be obviously entertainer or maybe like Gladiator Arena. And because he's so charming, I would probably wouldn't make him a human. I would make him something like a half elf.
Mhm.
And that would be kind of like the basis off of every character I make. I do stuff like that. Now, for my own stories, I can't use things that are copywritten by any form of tabletop RPGs. So, one of my main characters, he's actually his race is actually it's called Arger, and his name is Chasgo. His people live in a mountain range. They are so exposed to silver deposits that their skin is naturally blue. And this is something humans actually go through in real life. If they consume a lot of silver and stuff, they actually look like Smurfs. It's kind of crazy. But of course, it's a fantasy setting, so he's also highly resistant to magic with all this silver flowing through his veins. And just little quirks like that, the more I think about it, the more it just feels right. I've never felt like I've written myself into a corner or anything like that. I've just had a very good time expressing. Like I said before, it feels like I've watched a TV show and now I'm reporting the TV show. I don't know how else to put it, but like that.
Now, when you were doing these original stories with Dungeons and Dragons, were you allowed, did you take notes? I mean, was there a script you went off of, or was a lot of it just sort of ad lib, just going with what was happening in the game?
That really depends. So there's times where you need critical details.
Mhm.
See, in Dungeons and Dragons with Dungeon Masters, there's a couple of different tactics. There's sandbox,
Mhm.
where you don't know where the people are going, but you have your world established. There's another one called railroading, which is usually not the most enjoyable. Railroading is when you force people to make decisions. And then there's another one where these events are going to happen. Let's see what these guys do as it plays out. Like if a meteor was going to wipe out all of life on the planet and they might die by the end of it. We don't know, kind of thing. Those would be the 3 different types. But each one of them, there's times you have to make sure you have all of your hidden cards to play, for lack of better wording. But surprise, surprise, this person helping you all the whole time happened to be the bad guy after all. In order to pull something like that off, you're going to have a lot of anticipations. Let's say the villain of the story is very powerful in magic. Well, if somebody does an Arcana check there's a chance that person can be exposed. So you either have to make sure that's not possible, or just let it go and see what how that plays out. And because of that, there's a lot of prep, and then there's a lot of non-prep. I find personally that if I give the icing, the players unintentionally fill in the cake for me. It's actually very, very amusing, but also very entertaining. There's times where I can sit back and watch them talk amongst each other for about 15 minutes, and they're just deciding what they're going to do next and considering all options. Very enjoyable.
Because I was going to say, you need a wonderful imagination to create that. But when you've sort of limited yourself in a good way with this series, you want to do a certain amount of issues. How do you maintain that focus of this is where I start and this is where I end? And I can't veer off too far because I have to contain it within what I've set my parameters to be.
I understand. The way I like to word it is creative constraints.
Mhm.
So, a really good example of creative constraints, if somebody said, imagine a painting of a picture. It takes a while to start processing, but if you say, imagine a painting of a picture where it's a stormy night and there's a dog running through a meadow, right away it's very easy to lock in imagery. And for the story, I say the same thing. I want these things to happen, and then how do I fill in the blanks? I want it to feel like it naturally gets to those points. I don't want it to feel like it's forced. What's the term they use nowadays? MacGuffin.
Mhm.
Sometimes a MacGuffin is used to drive a character to a certain point. I try to avoid using MacGuffins as much as possible. But one thing I've done, I read a lot of Wizard comics back in the day, and I remember one of the most interesting stories of the time amongst comic books was Marvel's original Civil War. I believe that was '06.
Mhm.
But regardless, in 2000, yeah, I believe it was 2006. But anyways, in Wizard magazine, they talked about this spans multiple different monthly issues, multiple characters, multiple intertwining stories. How do you keep track of that? And the editor at the time says there were certain points where when we were discussing plots, we had to take post-it notes with characters' names and place them on a wall so you could keep track. That way, got a cough, hold on. Excuse me. So that way, when artists are filling in the background with certain heroes, make sure this person wouldn't be in this scene. Make sure you're not using this character. Little things like that. For me, I use an online platform called Roll20 for playing tabletop RPGs. And for myself, what I did is I actually just made a game. It was just me in it, and I moved the tokens around just for that very reason that you're stating, to make sure I don't veer too off, but um, staying on focus, getting to that eventual goal, but at the same time having some type of I wanted the illusion that the world existed before and the world existed after. The first couple of pages in this first issue, there's a couple of things that are established, but it doesn't explain why. For example, Madrakis does not like Ivywood, and they're just entering the area. And Dun and Eni, the little half gnome, half dwarf, he is a big fan of these friends he's trying to get together, and he's very excited over some type of job. They don't talk about the job, and if this story's only taken place over one night, you're not even going to get to see the job. So this is my first time writing a comic. I think it would be excessively arrogant and foolish to believe I'm going to make an ongoing monthly and everybody's going to love it. It's up to the fans to decide whether or not it is worthy of the industry. So, with that said, um, you feel like you're dropped in the middle of this world. There is a story over the night, and you feel like life goes on after the comic. That was my biggest goals in regards to structure and storyline.
This is a real nerdy question, but when you have all these different characters, how do you decide their personalities, the way they speak, the way they interact with others? How do you break down those kind of details?
Oh, that's like, I guess the best way to put it, it's in external influences. So sometimes I will just see something on TV and kind of tuck that away in my head, or um For example, I already mentioned Madrakis. His font is mildly difficult to read, and I wanted it to sound like for a giant snake-like, lizard-like individual to have that type of anatomy of a mouth, the words aren't going to come out nice. So I wanted it to be a little difficult to understand. So if you heard it, you would have to either be used to hearing that voice or reading that font in this case, and eventually it would become more natural. But I wanted to be very clear that he did not sound like your average person. Chazgo is another good example where I wanted him his actual appearance with the blue skin. He looks very intimidating. Um, his voice, I wanted to be very smooth, like uncomfortably smooth. So that's why the colors were inverted on all of his text. So it was white letter. Um, Sarlacc, who is just a pure-blooded dwarf, he has a Scottish accent, which surprise, surprise, that's pretty standard with dwarf stereotypes. And then the last guy, Dunanini, I didn't really do anything. I wanted him to I wanted him to feel like he was able to just fit in as opposed to stand out. But yeah, all of the personality traits. There are times when I will hear somebody say something and I really like that. I'm going to base something off of that later. And sometimes there are big stereotype tropes
Mhm.
that I'm not a fan of. A really good example of this is usually if you have a large guy of any type of group, they're usually stupid and they're good for two things: meat shields and like big hits. And for Madrakis, I did the opposite. Although he's a large and imposing person at about 350 pounds in weight, and he clears 6.5 feet, his actual most uh, impressive thing is his intelligence. And he is a big fan of studying books and scrolls, and he has a big affinity towards the arcane. And you see it a little bit. Like at one point, he catches one of those creatures by the throat, sets its head on fire. That was just blatant magic use. He's kind of like an unofficial mage. So the only thing he hasn't had is the opportunity to buckle down and just focus and study on that stuff. It's kind of a side thing for him.
How do you find the way to give everyone sort not an equal amount of time, but to make sure everyone sort of gets their moment in the sun with the story?
Oh, that was actually that proved mildly challenging at the start. It's funny you mentioned that. The um the two I felt in this story when I had the first draft done, the two I felt that didn't have enough attention was Dun and Eni and Chazgo, this blue-skinned elf. The way I tried to alleviate that, I had the passage on the inside cover of Dunnan talking to his father, just to kind of dial in why they're all together.
Mhm.
And the other one is originally I didn't have any narration. And when I showed it to a couple of friends, everybody thought Chazgo was like very like sketchy and not to be trusted.
Mhm.
And it wasn't. I wanted other people in the story to feel that way about his actual true self, but I didn't want the reader to feel that way. So I actually had him writing to an individual that where he gets his abilities from. Her name is Annette, and he narrates the whole thing. So it's mildly through his eyes. And the other two, I thought they stood out very well in their own respects, especially Sarlacc near the end when he gets his actual gear on, and then Madrakis between, I mentioned him using some magic a bit, but also his ability to vomit lightning out of his gizzard.
Mhm.
That was a real big statement. So between all of it, I thought it was a decent balance by the end of it. But it, like you were asking, it did prove a little bit of a challenge.
Artistically, how did you want to set the tone for the story?
I wanted the tone to feel like friends getting back together.
Okay.
So I wasn't thinking like hard medieval or gothic or superhero or anything like that. I wanted people to see these individuals interact. That was my top goal in regards to artistic expression, I guess. I'll give a shout out to a couple people. Evan Quiring, you can find for my interiors. He has his own 2 issues going on, or books rather. There's Murder City Devil, and there's also Lucha Mysteries. He's a fellow Winnipegger like myself. You can find Dan Kemp. He colored everything. And for anybody who's ever can recognize that name, he's colored over 100 issues of Spawn from 50 to 150, basically. He also colored the Marvel Knights early 2000s era. So if you remember in the not so nice movie, people don't like too much, the original Daredevil from 2003, just before the credits drop, Daredevil jumps off the building and he throws back his billy club and the cable swirls all around.
Mhm.
That scene is an homage to Marvel Knights Daredevil #1, and it's the exact same position pretty much.
Yeah.
And Dan Kemp colored that, and I'm really beside myself that I got all this talent. Another shout out to Micah Myers. He lettered everything, and I thought he did a stellar job. I didn't really have. I told him what I wanted. He looked at the panels. I think there was maybe two edits I needed from him, but he was really good to work with. And then of course there's a bunch of cover artists. The main cover was, which is part of the digital copy, that's Jimbo Salgado,
Mhm.
also colored by Dan Kemp, of course. They've never worked together. And also there was Javier Salterez.
Mhm.
He drew the first year of Dan Ketch's run as Ghost Rider from 1990.
Mhm.
He of all the covers, he did the one of Sarlacc holding the monster's head. If you've looked through the Kickstarter for #1, and Jenna Stark from New York, she did Dunanini. There's like a lot of names. I'm going to be forgetting names, I know it, but there's so much talent. I'm beside myself that a lot of these people have had a passive influence on me since I was a kid, and here they are actually drawing out characters of my own imagination. It's really, really cool. I've said this before to other people. It's the equivalent of having somebody like Elvis Presley sing a song that you've written.
Right. What kind of I guess the word would be relationship do you have with your artists? Because you hear sometimes some folks just give them a script and say, you do what you got to do. Other times it's a lot more back and forth, trying to work on different things. What do you prefer?
So I've only done it with issue 1,
Mhm.
and I'm currently in the works with issue 2 now. But for issue 1 with the interiors with Evan Quiring, I wrote out all the panels with the descriptors, and then I on a whiteboard I drew stickman style what I thought the pages should look like. But then I disclaimed, because I didn't want to be overly controlling, I did disclaim to him, if you feel like, this perspective would look better, or these panels would look better as 2, try it. Don't be shy. I'm definitely open. And he's been in this game a lot longer than me, so I was really happy to we had a good combo between the two of us when we worked together. And all of the cover artists, they were exceptional to work with. I already mentioned Harv Salterez. He was like, I when I first described what I thought would look good, I had Sarlacc. Okay, I want him to have some type of peace about him amongst being in a pile of chaos. I wanted him to feel like that quarterback that is everything going around and milking that last second to get that really good pass. And I decided, well, how about a couple of like monsters jumping on, trying to jump on his back, and then him swinging his axe and knocking out like 2 or 3 in front of him. He sends me the image of him just holding one that's already beheaded, holding it by the hair and looking at it in the eyes. And it wasn't what I asked for, but I immediately said, "Shut up and take my money." He did a great job. But every artist has been a very different experience. Erica Hollis, who did the cover of Chasgo,
Mhm.
she did a really good job. We had a little bit of a challenge trying to get lighting to make it look like a full cover, and She was really receptive and really good with suggestions as well. And the only other artist I haven't mentioned is the solo image of Madrakis. Madrakis, that one was hand painted, not digitally, the old school way, by a fella named John Zalesnik. Um, he was great to work with. He gave me three different poses, three different backgrounds, which two should we use to combine, and then he painted it out. Because he's very knowledgeable in color, there were times I'd be kind of worried because he'd be putting in an undertone and it doesn't look like what I want. But I was smart enough to just hold back, and it looked really good when it was done. That fella painted the cover art for Shinobi for the NES,
Oh wow.
and he painted a lot of things for Warhammer and Magic the Gathering.
Mhm.
And here's little old me, and he's working alongside of me. And inside I'm thinking, who am I? But for him, he's like, okay, so what else can I do for you?
Wow.
Wow, this is, you meet these people and they're humans, right? You sometimes when you see a celebrity or someone you really appreciate or respect,
Mhm.
it's very easy to make them up into, I'll exaggerate, some type of like demigod or something. But when you sit down and talk with them one to one or over the phone, they're people, like just like everybody else, and it's really cool to meet and interact and see these regular people make these really, really cool things.
It's a very crowded market right now for independent publishers through the Kickstarter and stuff like that. How do you make yourself stand out in a crowded field?
So I am a big believer that if the product is good,
Mhm.
it will sell. And obviously, it isn't as simple as that. You have to market it. Um, there are a couple different ways. I won't say them all because I want to stand out as opposed to everybody doing the same thing. But you have to be able to describe the book within two sentences, a hook. You have to be, you want to hold back, but you need to show stuff as well. The only thing I've shared with you for this issue two coming out is just a black and white pencil and ink with Jay Sloan.
Mhm.
In January, I will start showing things, but there's that timing. You don't want to exhaust everybody too early and show it all off and then see you in 6 months or something silly like that. So it's all about timing, and it's all about just getting your name out there, interacting with the community,
Mhm.
being a positive person, avoiding politics,
Mhm.
and the list goes on and on. I think a saving grace for me with today's climate is I'm Canadian, so it doesn't apply to me, all that stuff. But I'm really happy to say here's a comic, three issues. You don't have to know 60 years worth of lore, and I'm not saying that's bad, but if you're not used to this at all, sometimes picking up a new book you know nothing about can come across as intimidating. This first issue that's passed, which you can get in the Kickstarter for issue number two, you don't need to know anything leading up to it. So your mind can be a canvas. You don't have to have it pre-prepped in a certain way or anything like that.
Now, I mean, you are in Canada. Are you working cons and going to, comic shops and stuff like that, trying to drum up interest as well?
Um, I will be. So right now, my publisher, shout out to Philbo Publishing, Philip Russert.
Mhm.
He's in New York, so fortunately, he does go to cons. So he will be taking my book in those areas. But I will also, um, in January, I'm going to start considering. Unfortunately, it's not my day job, so there's only so much of me to go around. I'm a father of three kids. They're all under the age of 8, or under the age of 9. 8 is the oldest, but when the opportunity arises, one thing I would love to do is, because I'm about an hour's drive from the States, I would love to go to like North Dakota. They have a couple of cons there. I think that would be a lot of fun. It's on the table. That's the short answer.
Are you hard set that issue three is going to end the way you think it's going to end?
Yes, I wrote out the script for all three right before anybody drew anything. So I've had a couple of individuals read all three, and they really like it. It's classic three-act stage. Each act is an issue. Each issue has its own share of tension or action. There's good dialogue, conversation. There's driven story. Um, issue three, I know exactly how it's going to play out.
Okay. Can you see these characters splintering into solo books down the line?
I'm not against that idea. I mean, if you in real life or me in real life, everybody is the protagonist of their own story, right? So I think if done properly, I think any character could have a solo story. I think that's possible. Well, not just with mine. I think you could take the best example I can think of is what Brian Michael Bendis did for Luke Cage during the Civil War era. Luke Cage, I mean, he did have a following and he did have a level of popularity, but Brian Michael Bendis just took him to a whole nother level based off of just his writing. So, with that said, I'm not against that idea. The the best way to, I guess, the best way to put it is, as already stated, they're all the protagonists of their own story. So nobody is like a background character to another story. I guess the best way to put it. Excuse me.
Fingers crossed. This is a hugely popular series. Down the road, could you see handing off writing responsibilities to someone else to handle, another chapter or something like that? Or do you want to keep this within your scope of imagination?
That's a lot of variables to consider there. For it to be that heavily successful and to pass off the writing, again, I wouldn't want to be overly controlling, but I think I would say this next story's coming out, this has to happen. So you're happy to fill in the blanks, but this would have to happen. As for right now, because of its current state of popularity, I think I'm going to keep it in house because I do enjoy the characters and I do writing it out, or I do enjoy writing it out.
Mhm.
Um, Again, I'm not against the idea,
Right.
but for right now, I think the stories are best told by myself at the moment.
Could you see yourself doing a pure superhero book or a pure true crime, book as well? Or do you like to stay within, the sword and sorcery arena?
Well, I do enjoy sword and sorcery. Superheroes, I'm not against, but you mentioned saturation. Superheroes is the worst for saturation. And um, I'm not saying I couldn't make a cool story, but how many stories do you hear about in regards to superheroes that are non-Marvel, non-DC, non-Dark Horse, non-Image?
Right.
And they're out there. They're out there, and I've reviewed some and I love them. But if I'm going to invest this much money into talent, then um, I think the fantasy route is the best for me, not just because it isn't as saturated, but I'm just really enjoying it. I just really am having a good time watching these characters come to life on these pages. As of recording this, we have our first run printed, and I'm really excited. We're going to be showing that off in the next couple of days, and it's just really cool to see it right there in front of me, kind of thing. It's really awesome. Um, in regards to noir, I don't know. I that's a good question. I've never considered that. I think what I would like to do if I were to do something non-fantasy, non-sword and sorcery, I think what I would do is something that you couldn't actually define it to a genre of story.
Okay.
I think that's what I would want to do. And I'd have to think long and hard about that. Like sometimes anybody who appreciates stories, be it writers or otherwise, there are times when you think of a scene and it might be very generic and you might not even have names for people or anything like that, but it would be really cool if a story led up to this.
Right.
And I have a lot of those in my mind, as I'm sure many people do.
Bless you.
Apologies. I ate some popcorn. I got a shell stuck in my throat, but I really enjoy the fantasy part. I think if I were to go outside, it would have to be something you could not nail it down to a genre.
What right now, because you're in Western Canada, what's the
Yes.
independent comic scene like where you are right now?
So indie scene. Well, it's funny. We had Comic Con here at the late October, and you'll see a lot of individuals from different areas of different provinces of Canada trickle in. There's Calgary. There's a few in Edmonton as well. They're both in Alberta. BC's got a couple, and I'm friends with a few of them, quite a few of them on social media. Winnipeg, I don't hear too much from the eastern end. Of course, Ontario is like the most populated area, especially in the south, but it exists, that's for sure. And I'm always happy to review different indie comics. I like to give back and not just say, here's my stuff, give me your money. Peace out, everybody. I have nothing to do with you guys. But yeah, it is around in Canada for sure. And I mean, we're not as populated as the States, so it makes sense it wouldn't be as present as it would in the States. But yeah, it has its foothold.
Gotcha. So what's next steps for you? The Kickstarter part two is gonna, when does that go live?
That's going to go live in the new year. We haven't. We're kind of being vague on it on purpose. Like I said before, we can't show everything at once, and I'm like heavily excited to just talk about it all right now. Unfortunately, that's brand suicide. We'll put it that way, or franchise suicide. So the goal right now is we have a pre-launch for when it does go live for Madcaps issue 2 for Filbo Publishing. The goal is you can get issue 1 and 2 on there, and we've got some different cool add-ons, but there's some decent character progression, even though it's only been an issue. By the middle to the end of issue number 1, these 4 friends, they don't even, I mentioned they were originally going to be going for a job, but instead they're interrupted by an outbreak of the undead. They help the guards stave off the problem, but the dwarf Sarlacc, he notices that one of them was a junkie that he spoke to earlier that night. He doesn't have any bite marks on him, so they've made this. They're assuming, but they want to figure out if this outbreak has something to do with this local drug issue. Mm. And so this second issue is them getting a lead and finding out, are we biting off more than we can chew? As I said before, they're not the mightiest of characters in the realm. Should we actually be doing this? This is the equivalent of like Scooby-Doo for adults minus the dog. And so they're actually going to go into a grounds where some of this stuff is being stored, and anybody that's going to be storing illegal things, they're going to have it protected. Unfortunately, I can't say anymore, but it's going to get real exciting real quick. And by issue 3, the setup is like a really good payoff. It's definitely well, I don't want to say cathartic, but it gets to a point of this was a payoff. I'm glad I invested into this story. I really loved the ending. It had a good wall up to it. It had a statement. It ended with an exclamation mark. I can appreciate this miniseries.
Where can fans keep up with what's going on and new information about the project?
Okay, so you can find me on Facebook as DM Ray. DM is just short for Dungeon Master. You can find me on Instagram as Raymond the DM. You can find me on, as I like to call it, Twixter. I don't use it too much, but you can find me on there, Raymond the DM as well. You can find the Madcaps Facebook page, and we'll be setting up updates very soon in regards to the actual print run for issue 1, so you can actually see the book. And I believe that's everything for contacts. But follow, and that pre-launch, look up the Madcaps issue 2 for Kickstarter. The pre-launch is where it's at. If you don't follow anything, follow that. You will get notified immediately. The whole plan is to make sure everybody knows when it launches so everybody can appreciate it like they did the first one. It's going to be great.
And we are back. Yeah, make sure you check out that Kickstarter. When the links come up, we'll put it up there for you guys to see, to back this project. It sounds like a lot of fun with the different characters, all with different personalities. Can't wait to see how this pops off. This is issue 2, so you guys can still go back and get issue 1 as well. So Ray, thanks so much for taking the time. Guys, thank you so much for taking the time. Have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.